written remarks, Mr. Goldstein, you talk a little about the Global Engagement Center and focus on the important role it has in fighting back against Islamic extremism and providing a counter narrative. In the wake of what happened in New York yesterday, that tragedy, once again, we realize that people are being radicalized, even in this country, often online, and often through a concerted effort to reach those most vulnerable to that information. And so we need to redouble our efforts, and I appreciate your commitment to that, and you mentioned it again in your testimony. The radicalization from Islamic extremism is one part of the Global Engagement Center, but actually there's another part of it now. As you may be aware, Senator Murphy, who was here earlier, and I drafted legislation that essentially rewrote the Global Engagement Center's authorities and mandated it to include state-sponsored propaganda in addition to the counter-extremist messaging. So the issue of disinformation, propaganda that we're facing, not just from Russia, but also other countries, China, Iran, and others, countries that make an aggressive use of propaganda and disinformation, it comes at the expense of us and often our allies. And I do believe they're trying to destabilize democratic countries, not just ours, but around the world. And I think this is one where we're going to really need your help. From the cyber attacks we've seen, to the social media bots, to the internet troll farms we now know more about, to state-sponsored media outlets, including here in Washington, D.C. They create sophisticated information campaigns, essentially to sort of weaponize the modern information environment. And by the way, this didn't start with the 2016 election, and it won't end there unless we are more aggressive in responding to it. So I would ask today that you comment on that. As Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, you're going to play a key role in this. First, do you agree that countering this foreign disinformation and propaganda is a national security priority?
Yes, sir, I do agree.
Second, do you share Secretary Tillerson's public comments that support the Global Engagement Center and its mission to be able to counter this disinformation, both from extremist groups like ISIS, but also nation states, as required in the DoD Authorization Act last year?
Absolutely, Senator.
One of the issues we've had with the GEC is to get funding in there and to get the right people there. And you mentioned Radio Free Europe earlier, and it's an important operation, so are others, but frankly for me, the focus should be more on the online communication, social media, and having the expertise to do that. It requires some funds, both to attract the right people and to have the right technology. I was pleased to see that Secretary Tillerson approved the GEC strategic plan, and he released some funds to execute it. They also submitted a request to DoD for $40 million that we had provided for here in Congress to support the Global Engagement Center's efforts. We're still waiting, as I understand, for the final transfer of those funds, which are critical to the GEC. I'd appreciate your commitment today, if you're willing to make it, that you will be persistent in pursuing that funding from DoD to state to be able to ensure that the Global Engagement Center has the resources it needs.
Yes, sir, Senator, I will be persistent in pursuing that funding. I do believe we have to be very aggressive in our response. I also think we must speak to people where they listen. The world is getting younger. 50% of people in Africa are under 25 years old, from what I've recently been told. In Asia, the average age is somewhere under 30. I saw a story recently that said even in New York, even in the United States, I apologize, that 26 is the #1 age. There are more people 26 than any other age. In addition, ISIS has very persuasive videos online that are directed to people who are disgruntled. We have got to make this a priority, and you have my commitment and the commitment of the people within the State Department that we will do so.
Will you commit today to sharing information and working closely with members of this committee to ensure that you do have the tools and resources to be able to carry out this critical mission we've talked about?
Yes, sir, I will.
Right. I think that's a really important part of your job, and I appreciate your taking it seriously and reporting back to us on whether you think it's moving forward, both with regard to the funding and resources and also the personnel. With that, I'll turn to my colleague, Senator.